Appreciate you. Man, that was good. That's a good song, and she's right. That fits today well. Maybe better than better than well. I think a lot of believers, if you can say that generically, a lot of people that claim to be Christians anyway, and most of us even that try to live for Him as much as we can, probably think we've got plenty of time. We probably would sing that song and like the song and think, that's true. Jesus could come any minute. But we don't always live as if He could come any minute. We feel like, I bet He could come soon, but I probably still got time to get everything situated that I need to. But if we really understood it, we don't. We better be ready now, because whether He comes the second coming to get us, or whether we just check out of here tomorrow or today, we don't know how much time we got. So we need to live every day as if we're ready to see Him face to face, because we may very well do it. Turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 48. Actually turn to chapter 50. We'll be going through, I'm going to share the story from 48 through 50, and we'll finish it up. But I'm going to read a few verses out of chapter 50 before we start telling the story. I guess y'all got your papers if you wanted one. Did y'all get that? I really want to focus on faith and the faith of our fathers, whether it's your earthly father who may have been a believer or not, or whether it's church fathers or those that were founding fathers of the faith, going all the way back to the apostles, and then even all the way back to Abraham and even before. I want to look at those and are we kind of following in the examples like we should, or are we going astray like some have, or how are we doing, and kind of evaluate ourselves in light of all of it. So Genesis chapter 50, I'll start in verse 15. We'll read just 15 through 21. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "Perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him." So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, "Before your father died, he commanded, saying, 'Thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now, please forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of your father.' And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face. And they said, 'Behold, we are your servants.' Joseph said to them, 'Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones.' And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them." So we get to this point. The brothers have already reconciled with Joseph, and years have gone by, but actually some 17 years have gone by, and Jacob, their father, is ready to die, and he does die, and we'll look at that in a second. But when he does, the brothers all of a sudden realize, man, I wonder if Joseph just loved Dad so much that he withheld his wrath on us to keep Daddy from being upset. And now that Daddy ain't here, I wonder if he's going to come bring the smoke on us that we deserve. I wonder if he's going to do what we would have done to him. I think we need to try to get ahead of this maybe and feel Joseph out and see how things are going. So they send the messengers. But obviously Joseph was a better guy than they gave him credit for. Of course, I don't blame them for worrying about it. What wouldn't have been a bad thing to have in mind? You know what? You done me that wrong, or I done someone that wrong. It wouldn't be a far thing to believe that they might want to get you back for it. And so I don't blame them for thinking it, but I'm glad Joseph was a better guy than they gave him credit for. So in chapter 48, when it starts out, Jacob is getting sick. He's gotten to the point where it's getting close to time for him to pass, and so he sends word to Joseph, and they come to Joseph. Obviously, Joseph is dwelling with Pharaoh in the official palaces and things, and he's got official work to do. He's one of the high ups, well, actually second only to Pharaoh, and they're living in Goshen, and so there's a little bit of distance between where he's staying. And so word gets to Joseph, "Hey, Joseph, your dad is sick unto death. you need to come see him. And so Joseph grabs his two boys, Ephraim and Manasseh, and he goes to go see his father Jacob. He knows that if he's about to pass, that the customary thing would be for his dad to pronounce a blessing on him, and so he wants his boys to be there, and just a family gathering. Of course, he wants them to be able to see their granddaddy again before he goes, and just a lot of things in mind with that. And Joseph comes up to his dad, and they tell Jacob, "Hey, Joseph's getting close; he's about to come in." So Jacob musters up some strength and gets up on the side of the bed because he wants to be strong for his son when his son comes in and be able to portray some strength in that. Of course, he wants to pronounce some blessings as well, and so he gets himself up on the edge of the bed, and Joseph walks in, and Jacob says, "Joseph, it's getting close, man. It's about time that I'm going to go the way of our fathers, and I'm going to go to the grave with my father Abraham and Isaac, and I just need to let you know that." So they know he's getting older. They know he's going to die, and Jacob knows time's coming, and he's prepared for that. But he needs to prepare his boys for it. They need to understand this is about to happen, and so he breaks the ice with that. Kind of lets Joseph know, and he brings Joseph in first. He hasn't brought his other sons in yet. Brings Joseph in because this is a special blessing he wants to bestow on them, on his boys actually. And so he tells Joseph, he said, I want to bless your sons who are no longer your sons. They're going to be my sons. I'm going to adopt Manasseh and Ephraim as my boys, and they're really going to be in the place of Reuben and Simeon. Right? They're going to take the place of my oldest two who did me wrong, and one of them did me really bad wrong, slept with my wife, and the other one, is a ruthless rascal boy. He went and killed all kind of stuff, betrayed me in that, and so I want to adopt them, and they're going to become part of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so Joseph's, all right, so Dad's about to pronounce a blessing, and his eyes are dimmed, and you get reminiscent of his dad, Isaac, when he went to bless him, and he had stole the birthright from Esau. And so, I'm sure those things are going through his mind, and his age and his eyes have failed him. And so the boys come up, and they just get down on their knees in front of him. And traditionally, the oldest son would sit on the right-hand side of the father that was going to be blessing, and then the younger would be on the left-hand side. So the right-hand side would have been the prominent side of blessing, and so Manasseh would have sat there. That's where he would have knelt down at. Ephraim would have knelt down here. And so Joseph, understanding, obviously, his customs, he makes sure that happens. He grabs the boys, he said, Manasseh, you sit here. Ephraim, you sit here, and they sit down. But Jacob's eyes are failing him, and Joseph probably understands that. And so Jacob reaches out to do the blessing, and he reaches over like this and puts his hands on the opposite boys. And he pronounces a blessing on Ephraim first. And Joseph sees it, and he goes, "Oh, Dad," and he grabs Dad's hand. He said, "Dad, no, this is Manasseh." He said, "I know, boy. I got this. I know what's going on, but Manasseh's going to be a great guy. He's going to be good. There's going to be a lot of good things that happen with him, and you can read the blessings if you want to. And so there's a lot of prophecy things that's fulfilled in that, for more than I want to get into today." And so he says, he's going to be great. He said, but Ephraim, his younger brother, is going to be greater. He's going to rise up and do great things. It's going to be just a blossoming guy. It's going to be an amazing thing. So Joseph, backs off. He gives the blessings, and then he tells Joseph, he said, "Now listen, Joseph," he said, "I'm about to die, and I want you to promise me something. I know you got the power to do it with the position you got. I don't want to be buried in Egypt. I want to go back to the land of my fathers. I want to go back to the land of promise, what God promised me." He said, because back, years ago, God come to me and promised me, just as he did my father Abraham and Isaac, that I was going to be the father of a great nation, and that they were going to be blessed. And the blessings he pronounced on Manasseh and Ephraim are reminiscent of those blessings. You hear the same kind of tone in it. And he tells Joseph, he said, I don't want to be buried here. I want to be a part of the land. It's a part of our heritage. It's a part of the faith of my fathers and the promises of God to them and the promise of God to me. So I want you to take me back home and bury me in the cave that Abraham bought for Sarah, that Isaac was buried in, that Rebekah was buried in. I want to go back there. And Joseph says, "I promise, Dad, we'll do it." He said, "Okay." And so then he calls his other sons in there. And now, Joseph's in there and he's got the other boys in there. And he goes down through there pronouncing blessings on them. Well, he pronounces blessings on a lot of them. Some of them not so. Reuben, he just kind of tells Reuben what his problem was. And pretty much, boy, you messed up sleeping with my wife now. That don't go over too good with me. So he gets cut out of some things. And Simeon and Levi were the ones that instigated the murder of all those at Shechem, and so he said we don't need them two to be together in the tribes. They got to be dispersed among the tribes, and goes through some of these blessings as you go through it, and it'll take you a pretty good study to go through all of that and realize the details of it. The birthright should have went to the firstborn. Reuben forfeited his. Simeon and Levi messed up theirs, and so it falls really to Judah. And he comes to Judah, and that's when he really starts to pronounce blessings, and he tells Judah of all the great things Judah will become and how things will go about. And of course, then he goes down from there to Zebulun, Dan, Gad, all the others, Naphtali, and tells them. And he gets to Joseph, and he does another long blessing on Joseph. So the two that get the longest blessings in this is Judah and Joseph, and of course Benjamin, gets one as well. And he blesses all the sons of Israel, all of his sons. And take some time one day to go read through those and maybe get you something and study it, or either we'll have a study on it one day to see how those prophecies were fulfilled and how it worked out throughout history. It's really amazing that an elderly man who has no idea of what the future holds pronounces blessings on his children that get fulfilled. So that was obvious that the Holy Spirit was working through Jacob to prophesy of things that were to come through his children. And he does that because he's a man that loves God, and he is wanting to serve him, and he wants to stay true to this covenant promise that he has between him and God, that God had promised to the children of Israel, and of course his commitment to God. And so God honors that and allows him to pronounce these blessings on his children that all come to pass. And then he tells them, he said, listen guys, he said, I'm going to die. This is it. As a matter of fact, I got just enough strength to tell you this. It's divine really that he had been able to hold himself up as long as he had. And he said, but I don't want to be buried here. I want to be buried at home. That's what I want to do. And so he raises his feet up on the bed and lays back and dies, gives up the ghost. He had mustered up just enough strength to give the blessing to his boys, and then he fell out dead. And Joseph, being really the prominent one in the family at this moment, falls over on his dad and just weeps, probably customary to close the eyes, and gives him the goodbye kiss on his face. And it's just a time of mourning. It hurts. You lose somebody, it hurts. Should hurt. And Jacob's a great guy. I mean, I'm going to tell you, he's a great guy because all of Egypt mourns. Joseph tells the physicians, he says, I want my dad, y'all embalm him, start the process. We've got to carry him home. And the embalming process, which Joseph would have been, not been taboo for him. He's been part of that for a long time now. They go in, and I think it took some 40 days or so to the embalming process. They pumped him full of different kind of spices and fluids, and they removed certain organs, and there was a tanning process on the hide, and it took a good 40 days for that to be completed. Dried out, and you'd have had a brown color to the skin. It would have been mummified, pretty much. They wrapped them in cloth, and there was special spices and things and ways that they connected all that together. And so that was done, and it took about 70 days. So there was 40 days of the embalming process and another 30 days in which they just mourned the death of Jacob. All of Egypt, by the way, not just his boys, but all of Egypt mourned the death of this great man that come. Because look, I mean, he may not have been Egyptian, but his boys saved all their lives. None of them would exist right now if it hadn't been for Jacob. Now, we know Joseph was the one that the promises were fulfilled, but if you remember, Joseph went through all he went through and arrived in Egypt so that Jacob would live and so that Jacob's sons would live. Joseph was the savior to save all the others. And Egypt was saved because Jacob existed. Because Jacob had made a commitment to God and was continuing the promises that had been to Abraham and to Isaac and then to Jacob. Joseph comes along and saves Egypt, which in the process saves Israel. And so all of Egypt is in mourning for this great man that dies. And so Joseph sends word to Pharaoh, probably because he's not ceremonially clean to go into Pharaoh's presence after being in contact with a dead body as he was. And so he sends word to Pharaoh, Pharaoh, my dad wanted me to bury him in his home place. He made me promise him that, and I promised him I would. It's his father's gravesite, and it's a promise to our people. And Pharaoh said, "Sure, you do that. Take the people you need to take. Do what you need to do." He gave him some leave from work. He got some work leave, some FLMA or whatever, and he takes off. And there's a big entourage that follows him. I mean, they've got chariots and a procession that is unreal. They get all the way to the border of Canaan, and that's probably as far as the Egyptians went with him, and then the family took him the rest of the way, I'm sure. But at that point, they stop and they mourn for another, 7 days, I think it is, and they just cry out in great mourning. The Egyptians are wailing and wailing, so that the inhabitants of Canaan look and go, "Oh my goodness, it must have been a tremendous man in Egypt that died. For the Egyptians are mourning so greatly." Had to have been just one of the greatest guys ever that passed away. And so there's a lot of honor and respect. It would have been a funeral to really send someone home to be with the Lord. This would have been an outstanding display of respect and love for this man. And so they carry him on, into Canaan, into the cave of Abraham, and where his wife's buried, Abraham's buried, Isaac and Rebekah and those. And so they come back after the burial. They come back, all of them. Everybody that was with Joseph, they all went back to Goshen. Of course, Joseph back to his place. Now, the only ones that didn't come with them in this process, by the way, was just their little ones and maybe their cattle and things that stayed back in Egypt. So they get back and they're headed back, and the brothers are like, "Man, the only thing that might have been keeping Joseph from killing us is that our dad was still around." Because Joseph didn't want to do that to his daddy. Daddy's done been through enough. He thought he was dead for, almost 20 years or so. He said, I'm pretty sure that's the only reason, or it could be the only reason. Maybe we need to send somebody up there to talk to Joseph and kind of fill him out. And so they send a messenger, and the messenger fills Joseph out. And I don't know if Jacob actually said this, or if they said this so that Joseph wouldn't kill him. But they said, "Hey, Daddy made a promise to tell you this is something he wanted you to promise, that even though he's gone, that you won't kill us over this, that you'll forgive us of the great sin we did." And so, by the God of our father Jacob, please don't kill us. And when Joseph hears it, it breaks him, and he weeps. And of course, then they see that he's weeping, and they don't take that as anger, and they come down and fall in front of him and say, "Brother, please, man, please don't kill us. Please have mercy on us." And Joseph said, "Guys, y'all, I love you guys, man, but y'all are missing it. I understand that what you tried to do to me, or actually what you did to me, was evil. And I understand you meant it to be evil. I know what your intentions were. But I understand something you don't. That what you intended for to be evil, my God took that and made it good. He always intended it to be good. So am I sitting in God's place that I can hate you for a plan that God put together and drew out?" He said, "No, all I can do is praise him that he is smarter and greater than all of us." He said, "So you're fine. Trust me, you're okay. I'm not going to do anything to you." Now, he could have. He had all the power he needed to do it. But he wasn't, because he didn't sit in God's place. He feared his God. There was no way he'd have done that. He said, and he loved his brothers. He said, "So I'm not going to do that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take care of you. You're my brothers. I've got resources. You're going to be took care of. Your little ones are going to be took care of. Everything's going to be fine with you." And so he did. And they live on a, good life. And I think Joseph lives to be about 110. And Joseph gets ready that he's going to die, and he pronounces blessings himself. And the time comes where he passes. And when he lived long enough to see, I think, the third generation of his kids. So he lived a good long life. And when he passes, there's great mourning about it, and he made them swear him an oath before he died. He said, "Listen, guys, I want to be buried where my fathers were buried. I believe in the promise of God to Abraham. I believe in the promise to Isaac and to our father Jacob, and he's carried that promise out through us, and I don't want to be buried in Egypt," although he had a love for Egypt. I don't think he hated the place or anything like that. Picked up some of the customs, actually, with the embalming and things. He said, "But I want to be a part of the promise." Now, that's pretty significant, because there's nothing developed in Canaan for them yet. You know, that's a wide open, wild frontier, you know, back to nomad land. And he knows that God promised that they're going to go back to that. Egypt is a developed country, have luxuries, and he's living in a palace with luxuries. There's all these things that his children are enjoying and that his family's enjoying, but Joseph longs for the promise. He longs for the things that God promised and the land that God promised him. Even though there was so much to make you want to stay in Egypt, it may be that that it took some things to make them want to leave. Because you know, later on in Exodus, even after they are led out of Egypt after being in bondage for 400 years or so, that they're led out, they still tell Moses, man, we'd be better off stomping straw and making bricks for the Egyptians as slaves than being out here starving to death in this wilderness. So it might have took something drastic after being in that environment so long to make you want to leave it. And I think we ought to be mindful of that, myself, because we've lived in luxury for a long time. We've been blessed for a long time as a country, and we don't really want to fight it. You know, I don't think truly many of us want to fight against the things that bring us so much comfort. But some of those things really need to be fought against. You know, some of them, and I'm not talking about arms. I'm talking about spiritual things and prayer and evangelism and sharing the gospel with people, standing up for what's right and voicing that you believe in God and you serve Him. But it is easy when you're blessed greatly to be willing to compromise a little so that you don't lose your luxuries. Just think about if persecution were to come, to where being a Christian caused you not to be able to enjoy this anymore, but that there was less access to things or even imprisonment, something like that. How willing would you be to stand up boldly right away and let it all go right now? Now, every one of us, I feel like if we were to answer a questionnaire, would say, yeah, right away. I'd do it in a minute. I'm going to tell you that we better make sure that we're convicted of that now. Because when that time comes, that's not the right time to figure it out. It's a lot harder than we would probably want to admit in our hearts. I'm going to tell you now, this is God's people, and it's tough on them when Exodus comes, and they're not enjoying it, Egypt, no more. It's not a fun time for them anymore. It is horrible, actually, and it's still hard for them to leave. It's hard for them to still want to be gone when they leave. And they were being abused and killed, and there was things that was rough going on. So luxury, as much as I appreciate all the blessing God has given us, luxury sometimes and enjoyment of things and material things can be as much of a curse as they are a blessing. We just need to kind of remember that. Look at your paper. We're going to go through some of these things I wanted to kind of focus on and bring out. First of all, I want to look at Jacob's fate. Jacob's faith was that of his fathers. It wasn't something that he come up with new. It wasn't something he tried to reinvent so he could make it better and make it more up to date. And it was just, this is the promise that Abraham was given, and this is the promise that Isaac was given, and this is the promise that I was given. And it's the same promise from the same God, and I want to keep it. You realize now, I mean, it sounds good to us because we see it fulfilled. They didn't see it fulfilled. Abraham didn't see the land gathered. Not in his day. He's seen it from a different way through eyes of faith. But he didn't see where they took all the land. That didn't come till way after the Exodus, right? So he didn't see it. Isaac doesn't see it. Jacob doesn't see it. Matter of fact, Jacob sees them almost die in the land and have to move to Egypt to keep from just decimation. And the only thing that tied it back to God was a dream his boy had that he'd bow down to his own son. So it was a really hard thing to probably wrap your mind around. I mean, we just look at they had faith and it's because God spoke to them and that was easy. Lord of mercy, I don't know. If God promised you something and every step of the way it seems like something's going wrong, it'd be hard to hold on to that. It'd take a special kind of faith to say, even though I can't see it, and even though I don't experience it right now, I trust God that He is good, and I trust that He is faithful. And so I'm going to see it even if I die without it. I'm going to see it. I'm going to have faith in what God says. Because there may come a time when we have to do that. There always comes a time when we have to do that. We need to trust God whether we can see it or not. But Jacob did not see the fulfillment of it. Isaac did not see the fulfillment of it. Abraham didn't see the fulfillment of it. Joseph didn't see the fulfillment of it. None of the sons saw the fulfillment of it. Hundreds of years go by, and they're slaves in another country, and they hadn't seen the fulfillment of it. And then more years go by, and it is a long time. Moses is dead, doesn't see the fulfillment of it. And all these people believed in a God that promised them all these things, and they believed it because they had faith in God, but not because they saw what He'd do for them. And I just know that the kind of faith we tend to have sometimes is a faith that if I see what God's doing for me, I'm in His corner 100%. But as soon as something's taken away from me and it don't feel like it's right, things ain't going the way I want it to, then God, either God's angry or He must not be who He claims to be. And that's a messed up faith. That's not the faith of our fathers. That's a new faith. That's something we've generated and created that is not real. It's not what faith is about. He passed his faith on to his children. He passed it on to Joseph and obviously to his sons. And look, they didn't start out well. The boys was messing up pretty good there for a minute. If you remember, we went through some things that Judah made some mistakes. Reuben, boy, you talking about a daddy that could have killed his boy when he slept with his wife. His handmaid from his cherished wife, he sleeps with her as a power play to try to keep him from putting her in a place of prominence in the family, forced his daddy's hand and tried to take authority from his daddy in his own home, and his dad didn't kill him over it. That's pretty impressive, to be honest with you. I don't know if I would have. Now, I'm not claiming I would want him more wives. I'm just telling you, I don't know if I'd have handled that well. If one of my sons wanted to force me to do what they wanted me to do in my house and kick me out of my house and take control of what I had and then sleep with my wife, death would probably be for sure what was coming. I mean it. That's probably for sure what would have been coming. For Jacob to see through eyes of faith that he had sons that were part of the promise and not to take retaliation like that to Reuben, it's beyond my mindset, I can tell you. But now, Reuben did pay for it, so don't misunderstand me. I'm just saying it wasn't at the hand of a sword from his dad. And Jacob was a strong man. He wrestled with God, had him break his hip, and still wouldn't let go. I don't think Reuben wanted none of it. I just don't think he did. But eventually, even though they started out rough, they come around to where they're supposed to be. Judah, through his processes, he starts showing signs of hope. His heart starts to develop. You start to see things in that, and eventually he's standing up for his brothers and willing to trade his own life for them. And you see the faith building up in the brothers as well. You see it strong in Joseph from the beginning all the way through, but you see the other boys coming about. And so the faith that Jacob had and demonstrated for them, even though it took them a minute, eventually catches on. And he passed it on to his children. Now, whether his children take it or not doesn't matter. It's still his job to pass it. Try to give that faith to them. What they do with it's on them. They have to make that decision. But Jacob made an impact on the people around him everywhere he went. When he went somewhere, when he was blessed by God, then others were blessed. Now, if they went against him, then they were cursed, and so it didn't work out too good. But when he comes to Egypt, Egypt is blessed by it. And he came to Egypt through his son Joseph. Okay? Again, if Jacob didn't exist, Joseph didn't exist. And so Jacob, through his family coming to Egypt, Egypt prospers. They forget about this later on, but they prosper. Then we see Joseph's faith. It was a faith of his fathers. It wasn't an Egyptian faith. It wasn't some kind of pagan faith where he believed in a different God, because now look, that would have been an easy conclusion to come to. We live in this age of reason and understanding and logic and science, and we think we're so smart. We got the world figured out. We don't know nothing. They lived in a different time in which faith and symbols and seeing things and the gods being out there was just a whole different way of seeing the world and understanding things, other than those that were called by God and saw that He was the one true God. It just wasn't taboo to have all these other gods out there. And for your God to promise you things and you not see it, and you see that if I stay here in the promised land, we die. But Egypt over here is worshiping the sun god, and 150 other ones, it seems like, man, they are kicking it. They're doing good. And you come over to that land, and it would be easy to go, you know what, I think I'm going to celebrate Ra. I think this sun god's the way to go. Seems like he's the one that gives the benefits. Think I'll stick with this God. But no, Joseph says, I've seen all the benefits of the pagan gods, but I want the faith of my fathers. I want the one true God, Yahweh, Elohim. I want to serve Him. I don't want this garbage that the Egyptians have. Although I can see the material things, and material things mean nothing. They mean nothing if you don't have Him. So he passed his faith on to his children. And we know that. We see that he loved his boys. He brought his boys to his dad so that his dad would pass that blessing and that tradition and that lineage on to his boys, because he didn't want the Egyptian. Remember, his wife's an Egyptian. He didn't want that kind of priest. She come from a priestly family in the Egyptians. He didn't want that garbage coming in there. He wanted his faith, his family's faith. And so he passes that on to his children. Joseph definitely made an impact on the people around him. Everywhere Joseph went, he excelled, and everybody benefited that was in his sphere of influence. Even the people that hated him and tried to kill him benefited from Joseph being alive. That's the kind of people we want to be. We want to be so close to God and love God so much that even our enemies gain from being around us. That if they would capture us and put us in prison, they would benefit from it. That's the kind of, now I know that sounds messed up, right? But that's the kind of person you want to be. You want to be so close to God that nothing can destroy you. No weapon formed against you can prosper. It can form, but it can't prosper. That even in trying to destroy someone, that you could eventually save your own country because you took that person in as a slave. That, when they realized it, when Pharaoh realized, oh my goodness, we've had someone who has the Spirit of the living God in him. He don't need to be a slave in my prison. This boy needs to be on my throne. I ain't willing to give him all of it, but I'll give him second. But he needs to be on my throne. This is what it's about. That's the kind of people we need to be. Because if we're the Egyptians, we fall. The only reason they made it is because God's people were in prison. Had God's people not been in prison, all the luxuries of the world would have failed them. Then we see Israel's faith, and I'm talking about Israel as a whole, the people, not Jacob. Jacob's name is changed to Israel, but Israel is then from there on out, especially after the Exodus, when they become a nation, the name Israel is used in reference to his children and his lineage and the people after him. Their faith, at least up to Moses, prior to Moses and even on into Moses some, their faith starts to drift from the faith of their fathers. They forget the importance of the Abraham, the Isaac, and the Jacob, and the Joseph. And yeah, Pharaoh forgot who Joseph was, but I think the children of Israel started to forget something as well. Because you remember when Moses comes in, Moses has to reintroduce them to God. Now, not every one of them. And there were some that still were, there was a remnant. Obviously, Moses' mother and his sister were God-fearers, and they taught Moses the truths of the Scripture and the promises and things. So there were still those that were faithful, but there was a large portion of them that had forgot, because Moses says, who am I going to tell them? What God am I going to tell them sent me to save them? Who do I tell them you are? Well, he shouldn't have had to tell them. They should have known. There ain't but one. Kind of easy to figure out. God. That's it. There ain't no other one. But there was all these Egyptian gods, and they thought they were real. As a matter of fact, I know they did, because when they get into the wilderness and Moses goes up for just a few days, they start creating them on them fake gods that's from Egypt. Well, this God's done failed. Let's get us another one. And so they've forgotten that. And Moses has to reintroduce it to them. So as Israel moves through time and time passes, they drifted from the faith of their fathers. They failed to continue passing it on to their children, or at least some did. It didn't carry on down the line. And by the way, we've done that. We failed. We as a people, I don't mean each one of us in here, but as a people, we talk about the faith of our grandparents and their parents and how they went to church every time the doors was open. If there was a revival, I talked to Lloyd Thomas and all of them. Man, it didn't matter which denomination come into town. He said if they rode in on something and put a tent up, we was there. It don't matter if it was the Holiness or the Methodist or the Baptist or the whatever it was. If they was preaching the gospel, we went to church. He said we were always at church. That wasn't even a question. It was not even a question whether things should be closed on Sunday, whether people should celebrate the Lord's Day. Even if they didn't want to, you still had to do it because you didn't have no option. There wasn't nothing else out there to do. All right, so we drifted from that. We even think some of those things are crazy. We don't think that's necessary. Well, I know they did it, but you know what? They was just simpler times back then. And what we mean by that is they were more ignorant. It was simpler times. Simpler, when we say that, whether we realize it was simpler times, I mean, you didn't have to think about it as much. It wasn't that much thought put into it. It was just simple. You just go to church or you don't. Well, that's just profound. It's pretty profound because it is the answer to everything. You either have God or you don't. You either serve Him or you don't. The Bible usually puts it in black or white. You either have the Son or you don't. You either have life or you don't. Now, there's a lot of gray area in between, and you can get wrapped up in all of it, but it don't mean nothing because the foundation of it is, even if you're caught up in the weeds in the middle, if you don't have the Son, you don't have life. If you do have the Son, you've got life. Simpler times were better because they were smarter times sometimes. They had a faith that trusted the faith of their fathers, and they hung on to something that maybe they didn't have every scientific detail of it figured out, but they didn't have to because they trusted God and they knew that was it. We are a people that want to see things and know things, and you got to prove something to me. Nobody owes us an explanation. They didn't really have a major impact on Egypt after Joseph. Not that we know of. Until, other than being a strong slave working force, until Moses. And then Egypt pays dearly. But they just, when Joseph was around, the whole world changed. We don't hear about anybody else between then until Moses comes on the scene. And then the whole world changes again. So what about our faith? Is it the faith of our fathers? Now, I don't know what your dad was like. I don't know whether he was a man of faith or not. I'm not really talking about him. Although if he was and he passed it on, then thank God for that because there's not many of them around anymore. Thank God if you have someone who loved the Lord and you got to see an example of what that looks like and what it meant to live it out and to put it into practice. Thank God for that. But you do have fathers in the faith to look to. We have the Spurgeons and the Augustines and the Luthers and the Pauls and the Peters and the Johns. We have all these fathers of the Christian faith, and then go on back because we are the true children of Abraham. We have Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all those to look to. So are we passing our faith on to our children? And I mean the faith, the only real faith, not some watered down garbage that we got off of carbon copy of what Christianity is supposed to look like from people, but a real faith in which we trust God even when we can't see it. Though He slay me, like the Hebrew boy said, though He slay me, I'm going to serve Him. And even if he forsakes all, I'm still going to serve Him, but I ain't serving your God because your God ain't real. Are we making an impact on the people around us? Well, we ought to be. We better be. If we're not, something's wrong. Because when we bring Jesus and lift Him up, all men are drawn unto Him. So if we don't lift Him up, they're not. But if we lift up Christ, all men are drawn to Him. Is our future, this is the last thing to think about, is our future that of Egypt's or Israel's? Egypt went their own way, enjoyed their luxury, benefited from the Christians that were around them, thought that somehow it was their deal, forgot about the Christians that were around them, enjoyed life to the fullest, and rotted because of it. Was destroyed to the utmost because of it. Are we those people who think that we're good, we don't need God? We're riding on the backs of we stand on the shoulders of giants, is a quote of old. We are riding on the coattails of great men who loved God and God blessed as a result of it. And we don't think we need that no more. We don't need that old junk. We just want to do our own thing. We got it all figured out now. We're like a bunch of spoiled kids that ain't lived long enough to know that mom and daddy knew what they was talking about. Are we Egypt or are we Israel? You know, we messed up. We've learned from our mistakes. We've been knocked down at times, but now there's a time for us to get out from the world, to be pulled out of Egypt, and to start living for God again. And we're still around because God has a plan for us and He loves us. Well, you better be on the right side of it, because the wrong side ain't too good. Let's stand. If you don't know Jesus as your Savior, maybe you don't know what that means. I didn't know what that meant. I mean, I know I've been in church a little while now, so the church words make sense to me, but when I first got saved, I didn't even know that I got saved. I didn't know what it was. I mean, I was expecting this, magic light and maybe some kind of little old choir girl singing inside or something, something like that, But it wasn't that. I was confronted with a decision. Do you want God or not? Do you want to change your life and live for Him, or do you want to keep living for yourself and rot in hell? And I was like, well, I don't want that one. Whatever that is, I don't want that one. I want to go to heaven, and I believe that Jesus died for my sins. Well, then grow up and make a commitment. Quit being a kid. When you were a child, you did childish things, but when I became a man, I put away childish things, is what Paul said. So now, step up and be the man that God calls you to be, or rot, whichever one you want. So, okay, well, I choose Jesus. Right? And no looking back since. But I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what saved me. I didn't know what all that stuff meant. I just knew that I was wrong before, and then I accepted Christ, and now I get to go to heaven because of God's grace. And I know I'm sorry as God does. I knew that it was nothing to do with me. If you've never come to that realization, you never put your trust and faith in Jesus Christ, and you know if you died today, you go to heaven, we're going to have an invitation. Once you come down, I'll share with you in Scripture what it means to be saved. If you are a believer, then we need to evaluate ourselves regularly. But we need to look and see, am I living for the material things and the luxuries? And I don't mean we all got to go join monasteries, although I don't know that they had it as far off as we might. But maybe we need to just evaluate where our hearts are connected to all this and see if God is telling us to do something. Maybe He is, maybe He isn't. But we better be open to listen. Whatever God's laid on your heart.